Right now in early 2023, if you hear that a gaming PC costs $1,600, assuming all brand new parts with reasonable component selection, what tier of a system would you consider that? Is it mid-range? Upper mid-range? High-end maybe? That is the cost of this system sitting next to me, $1,600. I recently put this together with the help of the good people over at Micro Center. They're the sponsor of this video, and more on them in a little bit. It's been a while since I've worked with a budget around this range, so I wanted to see what I could build now that there's a bit more to choose from in terms of the most current gen processors and graphics cards. The goal of the system was to be able to game very comfortably at 1440p from like very high to max settings at triple digit FPS, and to also push a stable FPS gaming experience at 4K for the more like story driven or single player games. Also, when a system is that capable in the gaming department, it usually lends itself well to streaming too, which you'll see that this system is able to handle with no problems later on in the benchmarks. As always, links to everything will be down in the description below in case you want to check it out. But yeah, let's go over what makes up this PC. We're going to start with the graphics card, which the rest of the system had to be built around given how expensive current gen GPUs are at the moment, and for this I went with the RTX 4070 Ti. This is the Ventus model from MSI. Now before you get all up in arms about my choice here, because I know people weren't happy about the 4070 Ti on release, let me explain. As of making this video, you've got a total of two options to choose from if you want a current gen card for less than $1,000. You've got this card, which was released at an MSRP of $800, or the RX 7900 XT at $900. For the time being, the 4070 Ti is the cheapest current gen card available, and the way Nvidia priced them was very strategic given the market. If you try to consider alternatives, there's only a handful of options in the previous gen that are comparable, like the RTX 3080 Ti, 3090, and the RX 6900 and 6950 XT, but pricing on those aren't too far off from this in both the new and used markets. Go take a look for yourself. The high-end cards from last generation cost nearly the same, if not more, than the 4070 Ti. So yeah, for people with a little bit more to spend that are looking beyond mid-range cards like the RTX 3070 and RX 6800, this is pretty much all they've got at the moment until both Nvidia and NV release their new mid-range cards, whenever that will be and whatever performance those will come in at. With only one part chosen so far, the system already starts off at $800, half of the total build budget, which is pretty extreme. This is definitely not the type of split that I typically do on the channel very often in terms of balancing the build budget. So let's see if I can keep the rest of the parts more tame so that we still end up with a good build for that overall price point. For the CPU, I went with Intel's recently released i5-13400. This is a pretty interesting CPU to me because it's the successor to the very popular i5-12400 from last gen, except with the addition of some E-cores and higher clock speeds, making it actually a lot closer to the 12600K. It's got the same number of cores and threads as the 12600K. There's 6 hyper-threaded P-cores and 4 single-threaded E-cores for a total of 10 cores, 16 threads. This does have 300 MHz slower clock speeds on both the P and E cores compared to the 12600K, and it's not unlocked, so there's no overclocking here. But it was hard not to choose this, especially from Micro Center, because they've got it priced noticeably lower than anywhere else I've seen, effectively $200 after the combo discount takes effect. With this pairing of the 13400 and 4070 Ti, we're starting to tread a fine line of a CPU bottleneck. I'd say that this is about as low of a CPU that I'd pair with the 4070 Ti. Since most people in this price range are likely targeting 1440p resolution, it's fine, but you'll see later on in the benchmarks that lowering the resolution down to 1080p, which this card is completely overkill for, it's going to start pushing really high frame rates that will sometimes bottleneck the CPU. The games still perform really well though, super playable, no issues at all. Remember, there will almost always be a bottleneck of some kind in your system. Even if you pair the perfect components together, the way games are programmed and optimized differently, you can have the same system CPU bottleneck in one game and then the GPU in a different one, which is fine. You just want to minimize that as much as possible. To cool the 13400, I opted not to use the included stock Intel heatsink and instead went with the Deepcool AK400. This is a $1,600 build here, with an $800 graphics card. There was no way I was giving this a stock cooler treatment. At the very least, it should be getting some kind of a tower cooler. For only $30, we're getting improved thermals, lower fan noise, and better aesthetics with the AK400. The motherboard I went with is the pretty middle-of-the-road MSI B660M-A Pro Wi-Fi. This is the DDR4 version of this board, and that's because I've still not converted to the DDR5 master race yet. The total cost difference between DDR4 and DDR5 is starting to get close, to the point where I'm slowly coming around to it, but just not yet, maybe in the next one. I do want to note though that while speccing out this build, B760 boards were not widely available yet, so I wasn't able to choose from any of those, but that has since changed and they're readily in stock for pretty much the same price. So grab one of those if if you can. It'll save you from potentially having to do a BIOS update, as well as having 4 more PCIe 4.0 lanes in exchange for 4 less 3.0 lanes. For memory, we've got 32GB of Team Group Delta RGB DDR4 rated at 3600 CL18. Nothing fancy here. The frequency and cache latency works out to a true latency of 10 nanoseconds, which has kind of been the long-reigning sweet spot between price and performance. In terms of storage, I splurged a little bit more than normal and went with a 2TB NVMe SSD. This is an inland performance drive that features TLC NAND and has DRAM. There's definitely cheaper drives out there than this, but those come at the cost of being QLC and DRAM-less. It's really up to you though as to how much you want to spend in this department. There's a ton of viable options out there. For the power supply, we've got the EVGA Supernova 750 GT. This is an 80 plus gold efficient power supply that's fully modular and finds itself on the B tier of the popular PSU tier list. If you're using this video as a template or a build guide, you do not have to use this particular unit. Just like the SSD, there are a lot of options out there, and power supply prices are bouncing all over the place right now, so grab the best deal that you can find. For a $1,600 build, there's no excuse not to get at least a B tier unit. Just make sure it's at least 700 watts per NVIDIA's recommendation. And last but not least, the case. As you probably noticed from the motherboard selection and by this PC sitting right next to me, this is a micro ATX build, one of my favorite form factors because it's the perfect blend of size, availability, part compatibility, and most importantly, price. The case I chose for this build is the Lynnwood LandCool 205M Mesh. I built in the non-mesh version of this before and I really liked it. The 205M has been around for a few years, but they only recently updated it with a mesh front panel, and with that they've included 2 adjustable RGB fans as well. Micro Center's got a killer deal on these at only $65, which is phenomenal value. Unfortunately, they're a bit harder to find from other retailers. If you can find them, they're usually marked up. So if you can't find one, feel free to pick whatever case you want based on your own preference. I'll have some alternatives in the description that will work as well. Oh yeah, and I also added an additional case fan from RTX since the 205M Mesh doesn't come with an exhaust fan. Looking at the build summary and price breakdown, we're coming in just over $1,600 before tax. I can almost guarantee that most of your eyes are fixated on one thing from this list, and that is the redonkulously priced graphics card. Looking at the rest of the build though, I don't think the balance is that off. We've got a pretty capable current gen i5 CPU, 32GB of RAM, a 2TB SSD. Sure, the case is on the budgety side of things, but it's still a Lynnwood at the end of the day, and it serves its intended purpose. Not like I used a DIY PC or something like that. Bruh. For those of you without a Micro Center nearby, you will be looking at spending a little bit more for some of the parts on this list, particularly in the CPU department and due to the lack of the combo discount with the motherboard. If that's the case, you can easily drop the 2TB down to a 1TB drive and still have a very comparable list for a similar price. This was a very simple build to put together and would be perfect for beginners because there's no hassle of an AIO, no overabundance of fans or RGB controllers, and the LandCool 205M has more than enough room to work in. It took me around 30 minutes to assemble from start to finish. The build sequence was very standard. I'll let that keep playing, and in the meantime, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Micro Center, who teamed up with me to make this build happen. I can't stress enough how much of a pleasure it is to work with them. Literally one of the best companies to work with within the PC tech space. They've got a lot of great promotions year round, and February is their BYO month. That's Build Your Own month. Put together a system using their custom PC builder for big combo discounts. If you do end up building a system, you can submit it to their build showcase to receive a $25 coupon to be used for a future purchase. Also, keep an eye out for their ongoing new customer exclusive, which changes periodically. Right now, it's a free 256GB SSD. Check out this and everything else I mentioned with the links in the video description. Okay, with the system fully built, let's take a quick look at some glamour shots and B-roll. At the beginning of the video, I said that this build was mainly targeted at 1440p, so that was of course tested, but it does have capabilities at 4K, so I tested that as well. And I know there's some people who actually build more expensive systems like this for 1080p specifically because they want to squeeze out those super high frame rates, so I included that as well. Though that's where you'll notice some bottlenecking occur in the CPU when the results of the 1080p and 1440p become close or nearly identical. All the games were tested at pretty much max graphics settings, in some cases with DLSS if it was needed. The CPU is running at stock because it's locked. Graphics card was also running at stock. XMP was enabled. Resizable bar was enabled. I used Windows 10 with the latest 22H2 feature update. The power plan was set to high performance. Pretty much everything you should expect. So yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy the benchmarks. Alright, there you have it, the $1,600 gaming PC with an RTX 4070 Ti making up half of the entire build budget. What do you think? For the price that this comes in at, even with the 4070 Ti being as expensive as it is, I'm pretty happy overall with the performance. Would I have been happier if it was cheaper? Of course. But I also realized that there's only so much we can do about it. Sure, speak with your wallet and criticize companies for their anti-consumer practices, and it does work to a degree. Like, Nvidia did unlaunch the 4080 12GB to make this 4070 Ti and slash the price due to the backlash, but there's still a limit to that, and in this case, the limit was an $800 4070 Ti. I'm all for, waiting and holding out and using last generation hardware. Like, as a content creator myself, I'm using the RX 6650 XT in my own system to game on, to run my weekly streams, as well as to render videos for the channel, even this video right now that you're watching. I totally get that mentality. I'm like living proof of it. But I'm also aware that some people just want to build a new high performance system, or they're just long overdue for an upgrade, and they have the means to pay for it. So they're just gonna buy the expensive hardware regardless of how you or I feel about it. I mean, people are here paying $1,600 for PCs like this from system integrators. Relative to this, the build that I'm showing looks like an amazing deal. Let me know your thoughts down below. For a $1,600 system, what other graphics card would you have gone with while keeping it at a similar performance level? Really curious to hear your thoughts on this. Just please remember to keep it civil. I feel like the PC space has been getting more hostile than ever lately. People are being very polarized with their opinions to the point where they're attacking each other over computer parts and video game benchmarks of all things. I mean, it's kind of serious, but also not that serious. Come on, y'all. We gotta be better than that. I want to thank you all, as always, for watching and for continuing to support the channel. Big thanks to Micro Center for sponsoring this video. Thanks to the channel members and the donors, as always, for doing their thing. Be safe out there, and I'll see y'all down in the comments, as well as in the next stream and or video. Bye.